What's up, motivators? Welcome back. It's Kevin, and this is Pure Bullfit. Got something a little bit different for you today. We're trying a new format, a pseudo podcast format where I just talk about the things that are on my mind. I've put a bunch of unrelated training clips together for you guys to enjoy in the background as I'm talking about it. If you end up liking this format, it is an effort to streamline what I'm doing, the content that I put out there, in an effort to bring you more frequent content to consume. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, also let me know. I want to providing you guys with the things that you want to see on the topics that you want to hear about. So with all of that in mind, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I thought I'd start off slow. Nothing too big. Don't want to tackle any too complicated subjects. I thought I'd just talk about the little, tiny, insignificant topic of performance-enhancing drugs in sports and whether or not you should ever be able to compete again if you're busted. No big deal, right? All right, let's get right into it. So this topic in particular came up for me a couple of months ago when I was watching Omar Isuf's channel. He had a guest speaker on, a sports scientist from the UK named Alex Colliari, who was participating in conducting an experiment, I believe it's ongoing right now, to determine if by using steroids there are permanent adaptations to muscle tissue, to lean mass, i.e. the recruitment of myonuclei, or nucleus for muscle cells, from the surrounding satellite cells or stem cells that remain even after you stop using steroids. Now, if there was some permanent adaptation, that could have significant implications on a variety of topics, but most specifically sports. And that's what I want to talk about today. If there is a permanent adaptation, if there are some myonuclei of any significant percentage that remain, as some research is starting to indicate, is it fair to allow people who have tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, for superphysiological levels of testosterone in their system, should they be allowed to compete in the same federations, the same leagues as individuals who are not allowed to use those substances? I think it's a fair question to ask, but it's going to be a hotly debated topic. Now, I want to be clear, this is not a moral judgment on people who decide to use steroids or other anabolic substances or things like that. It's about its application to sports. Sports has a variety of rules. Athletic endeavors have a variety of rules that are intended to level the playing field so that achievement, merit, skill are the things that determine, in large part, the victor or the loser. There's an element of luck, but people taking unfair advantage should be, to the best extent possible, ruled out. That's why we have weight classes. That's why we have a master's class. Not because these are perfect mechanisms to absolutely level the playing field, but they take care of large portions of the disparity that can exist in relative hormone levels, in experience, and a variety of other factors. So most professional sports, the UFC, the NFL, all of these organizations have existing rules that if you're caught using a performance-enhancing drug, you are penalized in some way. That might mean that you miss 8 games, an entire season, can't compete in a fight for a year, and presumably that is to allow these chemicals to leave your system and no longer be providing you with some sort of advantage. So what we're looking at now is the very real possibility that some significant portion of the myonuclei that are recruited, these nuclei that are responsible for signaling protein synthesis, remain. And a lot of that testing to this point, which we're trying to reproduce in humans, see if it holds true for humans and not just lab rats and mice, is if it does exist, if they are sticking around in double-digit percentages like 20%, that could have a serious implication towards someone's ability to recover, to maintain, to build mass down the line, and constitute a significant and unfair advantage. You take somebody like John Jones, who has repeatedly failed tests, who is visibly bigger and stronger and faster, and you have to wonder what percentage of that is maintained, is a remaining permanent adaptation from the illegal substances that he was using to gain a benefit for recovery, for endurance, for muscle building. Is there enough evidence to suggest now that the myonuclei recruited in this way remain in such a significant portion that it constitutes a permanent and unfair advantage? Should he be barred from competing as the research stands now? Absolutely not. No, a lot more testing needs to be done. But what I am saying, if it bears true, then it's absolutely a fair question to ask. We have tested federations. We have reasons that WADA exists. And this isn't a judgment of whether or not it is morally okay to use these substances. If you're a person who believes that what somebody puts into their own body is their choice, all fine and good. I don't think you're a bad person for that. But if you walk into an organization and you agree to a code of conduct, willingly and knowingly violate that code of conduct in order to provide yourself with an increased chance of winning, then absolutely, we need to be asking ourselves, does this person ever belong in this sport again? If somebody had raised levels of testosterone in combination with resistance training over a long period of time, they have built up a significant amount of these myonuclei that will signal protein synthesis when the muscle is under stress, when it is utilized, when resistance is placed on it. If the adaptation is permanent, how does that affect recovery? We really need to look into all of the possible factors where somebody could take advantage of this by using a chemical or a substance in the short term to provide themselves with some quantifiable permanent advantage. So a couple of things that we know so far for sure is that resistance training, natural levels of testosterone, and anabolic steroids all have the potential to signal the recruitment of these myonuclei from stem cells from your satellite cells. Super physiological levels of testosterone do it even more, and that's really where the unfair advantage comes in. You are achieving a level of strength and power that you wouldn't have been able to achieve through sheer effort alone. And yes, it is absolutely true that we currently find ourselves in a situation where performance-enhancing drugs are prevalent in every single professional sport at every level, at the high school level for kids who are trying to be competitive to get to college so that they can play in the pros. This is a widespread problem, and no amount of testing, no amount of regulation is going to 100% reduce all of these instances to zero. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take any action. The fact of the matter is we dump an incredible amount of money into consuming sports, supporting sports, to putting on this big show that rivals anything that ever happened in the Roman Colosseum. We are willing to throw so much money at this that it is worth the investment to make sure that the athletes are playing on as fair a field as possible, as safely as possible. We can do it. But on the flip side of the coin, we've also shown a propensity and a perfect willingness to accept sports where people aren't regulated, where everybody knows everybody in it is using steroids. The Olympia, world's strongest man. Steroid use, performance-enhancing drug use is rampant. Everybody denies it, and then they come out and they admit it later. We all just kind of tacitly understand that these guys are putting enormous amounts of chemicals in their body, but we still watch. We show our willingness to continue to consume it anyway. So I think there's actually room. We don't have to lose our heroes just because, John Jones or Carl Lewis popped on a drug test. There's room for them to compete if we just be honest about our willingness to endure it and have separate, different levels of competition. Maybe we embrace the idea of having enhanced and unenhanced leagues. Look, I'm not pretending to have all of the answers, but what I do feel is that if it does turn out that there is some permanent adaptation, some permanent recruitment, some permanent advantage that is gained from using these things, it's fair to say, hey, maybe these guys don't get to play anymore. Maybe they don't get to play in the same playing field as people who have abided by the rules, or at the very least seem to have abided by the rules because they haven't been caught yet. But what the hell do we gain by ignoring it, by continuing the status quo, if it does turn out to be true? Just more world records with an asterisk next to it, more Barry Bonds where we say, wow, he was the greatest hitter, except, the whole steroid thing. At the end of the day, I just want to know what the facts are and to see us put as powerful an effort as we possibly can into making sure one of the core functions of our society, one of the core experiences that we have, athletic endeavor, is as fair as possible. But if it's true, that's not where the complications end. If raised levels of testosterone, synthetic or otherwise, provide a permanent adaptation and benefit, it throws a serious complication into the discussion about whether or not trans persons can compete or should compete in the gender that they identify with. Now, this is an extremely controversial topic, and I'm going to try and handle it as delicately as possible. If you know me, you know that I lean pretty hard to the left and that I tend to sympathize with vulnerable communities, and my politics tend towards protecting vulnerable communities. And I think it's statistically valid to say that there is no more vulnerable community in the United States, at the very least, than trans people. They have the highest risk for suicide, to be murdered, to experience violence against them, and they have the fewest laws protecting them. So vulnerable community describes them aptly. So with that in mind, it might come as a surprise to know that I'm not entirely sold on trans folk competing in the gender that they identify with, or with the category that they identify with. You see, if there is a quantifiable advantage to being born biologically male, and that's specifically who we're talking about, trans women who are women, trans women having a biological advantage if there is some permanent adaptation from that raised level of testosterone that they experienced before they transitioned. If it can't be overcome, if it can't be matched, we have to ask the question in fairness, not societal fairness, but athletic endeavor fairness, should they be competing against other women? Now, before we go any further, I wholeheartedly reject the idea that these are just men who are pretending to be women so that they can gain an advantage. To adopt all of the shit that comes with being a trans person, the increased risk of abuse and murder, and the way that we as society treat them, to think that somebody would willingly face all of that, I think that's patently stupid. I think if that's your angle, you're not just a bigot, you're a fucking asshole or a moron. And I also think that we can have this conversation while respecting the trans person and not calling them by their dead name. If you don't know what that means, you're not educated enough about trans people to even be talking about them in the first place. At the end of the day, if there is a legitimate advantage by trans women competing against other women, I think that it should be addressed and considered. But a lot more research is actually required. This is a topic that I have pretty strong feelings on, but facts don't really care about our feelings, and neither does fairness. We have to do the rightest thing that we possibly can, and that's going to take careful consideration and a lot of damn work. So now that I've left you guys with more questions than answers and just a tiny bit of information on some upcoming possible results of research, I'd encourage you guys to go ahead and like the video if you liked the video, dislike the video if you disliked it. Either way, leave me a comment below. If you want to hear more of this content, let me know. If you're not subscribed, you know what to do. But between now and the next video, I encourage you guys all to take a little time to go fit yourself.